Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about a neighbor who allowed his guests to park a limousine on my land. I had only a few minor conflicts with neighbors over the years, boundary disputes, random property line questions, and reminding the occasional weekend camper that my property isn't an unofficial public campground. I could handle anything with a friendly chat. The recent incident with Dominic, a neighbor, changed everything I thought about forest life being friendly. It began on a quiet Wednesday morning. I was up before sunrise drinking my first coffee and checking email. My property is large and mostly wooded, but I have a patch of open ground near the driveway for parking, firewood, and an emergency generator. When I went outside to watch the sunrise, I saw a huge white limousine partially hidden behind brush. It was clearly parked on my land, where I store firewood. At first I thought I was seeing things. I even rubbed my eyes twice because it didn't make sense. A limousine? Middle of the woods? Particularly there? Walking toward it, I saw it was no ordinary car. Wedding parties love stretched cars with tinted windows and ribbons inside. The fancy interior could be seen through the dark glass if you looked closely. I wondered if someone got stuck in the woods or if a friend dropped off a rental unexpectedly. That theory lasted 5 seconds. I could tell by the tire tracks in the soft soil that the vehicle had been deliberately parked there, off the road and on my property. I rarely argue, but this was odd. After some confusion, I asked around. I live in a small neighborhood with tall trees, winding trails, and long driveways. Perhaps 5 homes in a radius would be considered neighbors. If there was a new stretch limousine out here, one would know. Dominic has a large family and loves to throw big parties on short notice, so I thought it might be his. Although our properties are not directly adjacent, he lives a few hundred yards away. From his yard to mine, a forest path loops around. After walking a bit, I saw Dominic in his driveway, searching his minivan trunk. At first, he didn't hear me call his name. He turned and waved after a second try, grinning like everything was fine. "Hey, Dom," I said, trying to sound friendly despite my nerves. "Why is a limousine parked on my land?" He smiled at me with the same wide smile, but his eyes flickered with guilt or annoyance. It was a casual shrug. "Yeah, that's for my son Trevor's wedding," he replied as if it were normal. "We rented it for the weekend, but the wedding was postponed 2 days. Today is Monday, not Saturday. Big venue confusion. Hope you don't mind. I needed a place to park the car because our yard is full of trees." I stared at him, trying to comprehend what I'd heard. I wasn't sure if I was upset or confused by his approach. Breathing, I tried to respond politely. "Dominic, you should have asked first. I usually help, but come on. Parking a huge limo on my property without talking to me is wrong." He waved and said, "I figured you wouldn't mind," which confused me. "We've known each other a while, right? Your attitude is always calm. I wanted to hide it to avoid scratches. Saplings fill our yard, leaving little room for our cars." Something about his dismissal of my concern bothered me. He assumed it was okay because I'm too nice to refuse, not just because he parked the limo there. If he had asked, I might have been fine for a few days. However, his assumption that it was fine made me feel used. It suggested he didn't respect my property enough to ask permission. I tried to remain calm. "I get that you needed space," I said. "You should have asked. It should stay here for how long?" He shrugged again. "Wait until Monday for the wedding. I got a discount for picking up the rental early, but then everything changed. We had to delay because the wedding venue double booked. No big deal." And it may have been easy for him, but it was harder for me. People taking advantage of my kindness bothers me. I told him I wasn't comfortable. Dominic nodded and said he understood, but his shrug and half-grin showed that he didn't care how I felt as long as the car was safe and out of his way. Returning home, I stewed. The whole day, I tried to dismiss it as a minor inconvenience. The car wasn't hurting by sitting, right? I assumed it wouldn't disrupt my routines in a corner of my property. Problem? I was expecting a cord of firewood and usually stack it in that open space. It's usually delivered by a truck that needs space. Now I must redirect the driver, which could cause confusion. Additionally, the limo was disturbing my peace of mind. I had the impression Dominic just walked onto my property, put his things down, and left without a second thought. Firewood arrived Friday afternoon. My local friend Randy, the driver, called me ahead of time. When I let him up my driveway, he exclaimed, "Whoa! Was unaware you rented limousines as a side business." I felt embarrassed when he joked about it. I told them it wasn't mine and was there temporarily. We spent 20 more minutes finding a place to unload the wood so the truck wouldn't hit the limo. I was annoyed and kept thinking, If Dominic had just asked me, I would have arranged things in a more convenient way for both of us. Instead, Randy and I were inconvenienced and risked damaging a vehicle that wasn't mine. I kept calm despite my frustration. Just a few days, I reminded myself. Wedding and car removal Monday. Then I can move on. That Friday night, I heard from Helga, another Dominic-friendly neighbor. She was walking her dog when I saw her on my neighborhood path. She asked me if I had heard about Dominic's wedding plans. The bride's relatives couldn't fly in on time due to airport weather, so the wedding was moved to Wednesday. Helga was frustrated because she had planned her entire schedule around that Saturday date. Then Monday, and now Wednesday. The limo became the bigger issue. They would likely park that car on my land until Wednesday if the wedding was postponed. I clenched my jaw when I realized I might have to live with this eyesore for another week. I doubted Dominic would talk to me about it given his carefree attitude. He never updated me on the wedding date change. That confirmed his disrespect for me and my property. Dominic wasn't available over the weekend, despite my repeated attempts. Most likely wedding chaos. I left voicemails and texted him but got no response. The limo sat on my property day and night like a beast. Every time I looked, I got angrier. I even weighed the options in my head. Did I want to escalate? Should I call the rental company? Should I call a tow truck myself? However, these were big moves, and I didn't want to start a neighborly war. More I thought about it, the more I realized Dominic had gone too far. If only he had approached me, apologized, and politely requested that it stay. I might have ignored my annoyance then. That didn't happen. Finally, on Sunday morning, I went to Dominic's property to find him. I heard people inside his door when I knocked. The wedding was noisy, a vacuum ran, and food smelled. Dominic finally greeted me after a while. He looked too carefree in shorts and a wedding-themed t-shirt for someone who had turned my land into his parking lot. "Hey," he said casually, as if we were best friends. "What's up?" I tried not to snap. "Look," I said, "I need to discuss that limousine with you. There are rumors that the wedding will be on Wednesday. That means it's been on my property since Wednesday last week and won't leave for several days." "That's wrong." He nodded. But then he explained that they had no control over the flight cancellations and that they were caused by outside events. The same reasoning applied to how his yard was too cluttered with trees to accommodate such a large vehicle, and how the limo rental company would charge a fortune to store it at their facility. They offered a great discount if I kept it. However, since the wedding date has changed, they want to charge for each extra day unless we keep it. I apologize for the inconvenience, but I can't do anything about it right now. With caterers and the big tent set up, the yard is too crowded. We can't risk that limo blocking everything, and it won't fit. Hearing this, I was even more sure he saw my property as an easy solution to his problems, as if I existed only to solve his logistics. Inhaled deeply. "Dominic, move it. I would have helped if you asked last week. However, it has been sitting for over a week. I can't keep rearranging my schedule. I want the car off my land." His face changed, losing some friendliness. "I can't move it," he said. "We tried to move it in our driveway, but the branches prevented it. My guests are in the clearing behind the house. Nobody else has space, just a few more days, 4 or 5 if you count the after-wedding activities. Your fuss is inexplicable. I thought we were neighbors helping each other." The statement hurt me strangely. We respect each other's property and boundaries as neighbors. Right then, my annoyance turned into resolve. "Dominic," I said calmly, "if you don't move it, I'll tow it. Not joking around. When I tell you not to, you can't leave a vehicle on my property." Really laughed. His laugh was a dismissive chuckle under his breath. "You won't do that," he said. "Years have passed since we met. You'd never disrespect. Doing so would cause major conflict. This is all misunderstanding, not calling a tow truck on me. I know you better." I swallowed my anger. I said, "We'll see," turning away. My heart raced as I walked home. He told me he read my personality and knew I wouldn't escalate. It was true for a while. I rarely caused trouble, especially with neighbors. However, his arrogance and entitlement drove me over that day. I threatened to act if he wouldn't listen. The first challenge was determining whether towing a vehicle from private property in a remote area was legal. I spent the next hour calling a local law enforcement friend to confirm the steps. He believes the landowner can remove a vehicle parked illegally on private property, but it helps document photos and texts. Yes, I did that. I photographed the limo in my yard. I also saved screenshots of my text messages showing Dominic refusing to remove the car on my request. My friend mentioned that in remote areas, some towing services may require proof of property ownership, or that you requested removal. and were denied. With these details, I called the local towing company, which had a big rig for towing large vehicles. The company's dispatcher, Belinda, seemed amused by my request. "A limousine in the woods? Nothing like that happens every day," she said. "We can help if it's parked illegally on your property. We may need a special truck for the terrain. Is there a direct route or paved driveway for our tow truck?" I told them there was a dirt path and open space near my house, but the truck had to avoid the trees. She said a technician would check the situation before connecting anything. The towing company and I agreed on Monday morning as the earliest available time. I worried about a fight with Dominic, but he'd been warned. Not listening. He said I wouldn't. He was about to be proven wrong. Dominic said nothing to me from Sunday night to Monday. No sight or word from him. I wasn't sure if he understood my seriousness or was ignoring it. Early Monday morning, I gave him one last chance. I marched to his house and knocked again. Trevor, the groom-to-be, answered the door looking frazzled. He apologized for his father's behavior and offered to help, but he couldn't move the limousine. I didn't want to stress Trevor about the wedding details, who was having a meltdown. But I told them the car had to be moved now or be towed in hours. Trevor nodded reluctantly and promised to tell his dad. I went home after thanking him. Part of me felt bad because Trevor didn't park or refuse to move it. He was caught in this mess. However, a principle was at stake. I tried to forget my guilt by reminding myself that I gave Dominic every chance to do the right thing. 2 hours later, a big tow truck drove up my driveway. Pete, the tall operator, stepped out, scratched his chin and said, "Well, ain't this interesting?" He laughed and started checking the ground to make sure the truck wouldn't sink or get stuck. I advised on the best approach. We discussed how we could slowly pull the limo onto the main drive by hooking the front end. It wasn't easy, but Pete had the right gear and firm ground. Dominic arrived as he hooked up the limo. He yelled before I saw him. Angry, he ran over with disheveled hair. "You're doing what? You cannot!" he shouted. Pete briefly looked at me as if to ask, "Is this the guy?" I nodded. Pete kept hooking up the car without responding. "I warned you, Dominic," I said calmly. "I threatened to tow it if you didn't move it. For nearly a week, you left it on my land without permission. Private property. You cannot do as you please." Dominic seemed ready to argue. He looked at the towing operator who was working without him. "You can't do this," Dominic repeated. "You know why it stands. Moving it was impossible. The wedding is days away, completely ruining the plan. I'll have to pay the rental company for the tow or they may not let us use it for the wedding. You're selfish." That sparked my anger. I breathed deeply and tried to stay calm. Selfish? You called me selfish when you parked a limo on my property without asking and left it after I told you to remove it? You basically forbade me from calling a tow truck, so here we are, it's your fault. He appeared almost wounded, but he was furious. He paces, muttering about how I was overreacting and how we were good neighbors. Pete carefully drove the limo out of the clearing, across my driveway, and onto the neighborhood's main road after hooking it up. Dominic tried blocking the path one last time, but he knew better than to face the moving truck. He shouted empty threats about suing me. I knew I could legally remove a trespassing vehicle, so court didn't bother me. I felt relieved when the tow truck left. Dominic lost his limo, symbol of entitlement. I felt in control of my property again after days. I also knew I'd probably started a fight with Dominic. I believed I was right. Dominic was furious afterwards. He avoided me for days. I didn't actively talk to him either. Trevor's wedding was on Wednesday as planned, but they had to scramble for a last-minute limousine rental, likely paying more or switching companies. Rumors conflicted. Some say the limo rental company was upset by the towing incident and canceled the booking. Others said Dominic was fined. Regardless, it cost him more and wasn't the smooth, discounted arrangement he wanted. Within days, Trevor texted me to thank me for warning them before towing, which I appreciated. He said, "Dad's mad, but I understand it was your property. I wished him and his bride the best and hoped he could put this drama behind him and focus on his new marriage." Dominic seemed to tell everyone in the neighborhood that I overreacted and was after him. Several people asked me my story. They understood my position after I explained how he never asked permission, how I repeatedly requested the car's removal, and how he laughed in my face. Some neighbors respected me more because I wasn't a pushover. Of course, the conflict continued. Dominic confronted me a week later. He turned up at my door unexpectedly one morning. He was standing there with a forced smile when I opened it. He requested a conversation. I didn't know how I felt, but listened. He spent a long time on my porch explaining how this wedding was chaotic, how he hoped I'd be more neighborly, and how I embarrassed him in front of his family. I listened, but when he said, "I thought we had a friendly relationship," I interrupted. "I told Dominic that friendly relationships don't disrespect property. You thought you could park a rented limo on my property. No request. You refused to move it. You laughed at my warning. You can't blame me for protecting my rights." Despite his claim that it wasn't hurting anything, I reminded him that I had deliveries and plans for that space, that we might have made a schedule if he had asked first. He acted entitled. He eventually admitted his mistake, but he couldn't apologize. He concluded, "I'll just make sure to handle my own affairs from now on. I guess I can't trust you for a simple favor." I shrugged. I love doing favors for respectful people. "Not a favor. You took without asking." He frowned and left my porch without further comment. I thought that would be our last long conversation. Days became weeks. Wedding buzz subsided. People stopped discussing the limo incident. I felt peaceful again, but Dominic became distant. If we met on the main road, neither of us waved. Tension was high, but at least I wasn't dealing with random vehicles on my property. Also, I took steps to prevent future encroachment. I placed a simple chain barrier across the clearing's entrance with a sign saying, "Private property. No unauthorized parking." It wasn't fancy, but it sent the message that big vehicles shouldn't enter. I added a camera there to provide proof if something similar happened again, not to catch criminals. Soon after, I learned Dominic had a history of pushing neighborhood boundaries. He once forced Helga, a neighbor, to store some bulky equipment in her garage because he ran out of space. She initially agreed, but later asked him to remove it. Making excuses, he delayed months. It turns out I wasn't alone in this. My towing the limo was probably his first serious overstep penalty. He never admitted it, but it rattled him. A subplot involving my next-door neighbor Eugene was unexpected. Older man Eugene keeps bees. His backyard apiary has many hives and is well hidden in the forest. We've always gotten along. Though quiet and reclusive, we occasionally share honey and garden produce. Eugene approached me while I was mowing a small patch of grass near my mailbox after the limo incident. He stopped me, patiently waiting for me to kill the engine, and then commented on the mess. "You know," he began, "I was worried how you would handle Dominic. His friendly exterior can push people around. I respect your actions. People like him need limits." I appreciated his words and told him about my chain barrier. Eugene nodded and said, "Just watch him." I remember that comment. When people are publicly humiliated, they look for ways to get even if they have no grounds. I realized the story could continue if Dominic wanted revenge or a misguided payback, but weeks passed with no results. Maybe Dominic just relaxed. A month after the wedding, a car engine and bright headlights woke me up in the middle of the night through my bedroom window. I got out of bed and looked outside, alarmed. Across my property from the new chain barrier was a pickup truck. Dominic's truck was different. I knew how it looked. The old model was loud and battered. I thought it might be a lost person or a group of teens looking for a party spot. I saw the driver fiddle with the chain barrier. My alarm bells went off. Is someone breaking into my land? Taking out my phone, I quietly put on my shoes and prepared to call the police. Before I reached my porch, the pickup truck had driven down the dirt road in the opposite direction. I checked the barrier and found the lock tampered with. It had scratches like someone had tried to break it, but it held. Since I had no proof of who was behind it, I replaced the damaged lock the next morning and added a motion detection camera. The next night, the truck appeared around the same time. My new camera captured a blurry image of someone exiting the vehicle, yanking the chain, and running back to the truck at the red light. Although the footage was grainy, I could tell it wasn't Dominic. They were lanky and wore ball caps. It could have been a random trespasser or Dominic's friend or relative. I had no idea. I considered telling Dominic or his associates that I wouldn't be intimidated by this, but without proof, more accusations would follow, so I kept quiet and secured my property, installing solar-powered motion sensor lights, posting more signs, and informing my local law enforcement friend about these incidents. He advised me to report them immediately if I catch them again. No one saw that pickup again for days. Normalcy returned. Ragging leaves, splitting firewood, and preparing the house for cooler weather were my fall tasks. Unless Dominic gave me a tense look on the way into town, I forgot about the whole story. Though unfriendly, he didn't verbally harass me. That was my win. Several weeks later, Marcus, Dominic's new daughter-in-law's father, visited. Knocked on my door and introduced himself politely. He said he was staying with Dominic's family while visiting from out of state and wanted to clear the air. I was surprised but invited him to talk on my porch. Marcus told me he'd only heard Dominic's side of the limo situation, but had recently found Trevor's, which showed Dominic never asked for permission. Marcus believed the family drama over the wedding had overshadowed Dominic's trespassing on my property. Marcus calmly stated, "Trevor and my daughter had nothing to do with that fiasco. They apologized for the issue. Trevor told me you were polite at first, and Dominic's behavior may have escalated the conflict." I appreciated his words, but was cautious. "I hold no ill will toward Trevor or his wife," I told Marcus. "I couldn't tolerate that disrespect." Marcus nodded. "Yes, I understand. I appreciate your patience overall. I also came over to tell you that Trevor and my daughter are not behind Dominic's chain barrier antics. They condemn such conduct. I understand your position because I was raised to respect property lines." He left after a few more pleasantries. The entire interaction was surreal. I felt like I was in a soap opera with the father-in-law mediating. However, knowing Dominic's circle didn't support his story was nice. The real question was whether Dominic learned from the experience. He appeared low-key from the outside. However, I wondered if he was resentful or planning something else. I also considered that the random pickup truck was his friend, but I found no proof. The chain barrier may have been a trespasser checking out nearby properties. One more plotline. The local planning commission reviewed property lines and usage for environmental impact. Because we live in a forest, clearing trees or changing drainage patterns is regulated. Each homeowner had to report usage. No big deal, but it required me and the neighbors to fill out forms about what we did on our land, such as building new structures or cutting down big trees. My first formal meeting with Dominic was at the planning commission meeting. It was a small room in the town center where we sat. He was scowling. I focused on paperwork and ignored him. The meeting was tedious, mostly about checking for stream pollution and illegal forest clearing. Dominic approached me during a break. I was immediately on guard, but he asked if I was still mad. I didn't like being disrespected, but I'd leave things alone if he respected my property. I understood, he muttered. He surprised me by saying, "I wish I'd handled it differently." As close as I got to an apology, I agreed, taking it at face value. Maybe he worried that if he kept antagonizing me, I'd cause more trouble for him, especially when property rights were discussed. Maybe he realized his mistake. Though I still distrusted him, the tension seemed to be easing. I walked in the forest near Dominic's property a few days after that meeting. Picking up fallen branches cleared a small hiking path I like. I discovered a small clearing on Dominic's side that had grown. Fresh stumps from cut trees. Dominic probably built a storage shed. I remembered our conversation weeks earlier when he said his yard was too tree-filled to park the limousine. He had never cleared his lot before the wedding, but now he had chainsawed a section. Perhaps the limo incident taught him that he needed to make room for large vehicles on his property. Irony made me smile. If he had cleared some of this before, the limo might have fit and none of this drama would have happened. That was history now. I quietly walked, happy that Dominic's overflow parking was no longer on my property. Life was mostly peaceful for a while. Dominic and I never spoke, which was fine with me. That mysterious pickup truck stopped appearing, and the chain barrier remained. I could store firewood, get deliveries easily, and enjoy my land. I occasionally saw Dominic's new clearing project, which looked like it was becoming a large yard for multiple vehicles. His log piles were neatly stacked after cutting down a dozen trees. I suspected he hired a contractor to clear most of it because it was a lot of work. Someone may have loaned him heavy equipment. It wasn't my business, so I didn't ask. When I saw trucks near that clearing one afternoon, curiosity took over. So I took the public path around Dominic's property's backside. I could watch construction from there. The crew leveled the ground, possibly laying gravel for a parking pad. A worker was a friend of a friend. Only waves were exchanged. Dominic nodded as he turned the house corner later. No smile. Just nod. Nodding, I continued. I'd like to say Dominic and I reconciled and became friends again. In reality, we live nearby with little interaction. He and I respect each other's land and don't interfere. We wave half-heartedly on the main road occasionally. I think he still resents me for towing that limo, but he knows I won't let anyone use my property without permission. Neighbors occasionally recount the forest limo fiasco, especially when newcomers arrive. It's become local folklore as an example of how important property boundaries are, even in a helping community. Ironically, Trevor and his wife are fine. I heard the wedding was lovely after they resolved the transportation issues. Trevor has always been polite when I've seen him around town. We don't discuss the limo. better left behind. This reinforced my belief that you can't let people steamroll you. Even if you're a friendly neighbor or easygoing, you must sometimes stand firm to protect your peace of mind, property, and self-respect. I would have helped Dominic if he had asked politely and included me in the decision. But when someone thinks they can do whatever they want with your land, you can't let them. Best part? I proved him wrong about one thing. You're not going to call a tow truck on me. I did. If it happened again, I'd do it. Thankfully, that disaster won't have a sequel. Dominic learned I'm no pushover, so my land is mine. Friends, thank you. See you soon.